Afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Black Health Matters Virtual Summit. My name is Deidre Tate, and I'm the event producer for the summit. And we just want to thank you for helping us break all kinds of records today. One of the reasons that we had so much exposure, I think, is because of some of the community partners that we had that worked really closely with us. And I just want to shout them out. We have the members of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, the Eastern area of the Links Incorporated, the Greater New York Black Nurses Association, Empire State Medical Association, The Whole Woman, and Odyssey Media. So we just want to thank them for sharing our event with their networks, and of course, the amazing Black Health Matters team. And the reason why I'm here introducing this panel is because when Rosalind Daniels told me that they did a survey of Black Health Matters 15,000 plus database, they asked what was the number one thing that African Americans were concerned about, and it was mental health. This is a topic that has, entrenched everyone's lives, and everyone is dealing with it in one way or another. And I could not think of a better person to moderate and curate this panel than my girl Shanti Das, who is the founder of Silence the Shame. I've known Shanti for, I think, all of the 25 years that she was in the music industry. She actually left. She started as an intern, moved her way up to senior VP. She has since left that entire industry to follow her passion because she has had her own issues with mental illness and mental health. And she was so passionate that she founded a not-for-profit organization called the Hip Hop Professional Foundation, Inc., which has since remorphed itself into Silence the Shame Incorporated. I'm going to leave it there because she tells her story so amazingly, but more importantly, she has some additional guests that are just as passionate about mental health as she is. So Shanti, thank you so much for joining and being with us, and have a great panel.
Deidre, thank you so much, and thank you for allowing me to moderate this most important conversation. You know, you are like a big sister to me. Like you said, I've known you pretty much half of my life. And I just appreciate you and love what you're doing in the community as well. And I just want to thank Black Health Matters, Rosalind Daniels, and yourself for curating such a phenomenal day of incredible information for our community, something that I know will stick with everyone for years to come. And to be able to close out this important virtual summit around mental health. And I think, you know, right now within the pandemic, so many people are suffering. This is the perfect opportunity for us to talk about our mental health and be okay with having that conversation. So thank you, Deidre.
Yep, okay, enjoy.
All right. So I would first love to introduce my panelists, and then I'll come back to you guys and give a little bit more information about myself and my journey. First, I would like to start with Dr. Randy Sconiers, who is a colleague and a friend and has really been a huge supporter of Silence the Shame and the work that we do in the community to help erase stigma. Welcome, Dr. Randy.
Hey, Shanti, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Deidre, for that great intro. Looking forward to a great conversation with you and Lynette.
Randy, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your career?
Sure. I'm a doctor of social work here in New Jersey, a licensed clinical social worker. I've been doing mental health therapy, counseling practice for over 20 years. I'm also dually licensed, so I'm licensed in Florida as well. And I'm in full-time practice, so I see clients in an outpatient setting. And then in 2017, I started a program called Mental Hop, which is all about mental health education through hip hop culture, because I just wanted the opportunity to engage people in conversation to decrease the stigma and shame around mental health, that stigma that we all sort of deal with. And I also went ahead and became an adjunct professor at Kane University. So I'm happy to be here to be part of this panel and share my thoughts and experience with you guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Randy. And last but certainly not least, let's please welcome Lynette Shaw to the panel. Lynette and I met maybe over a year ago now, but I feel like I've known you forever. We are like kindred spirits, and prior to COVID-19 happening, you know, we were planning on spending time together and starting to lead the charge in New York City and continue to further, you know, the education around mental health. But she is the founder of the Lynette Shaw Group, and she also does a lot of work around mental health first aid and CIT training, as well as in law enforcement. So we are truly honored to have Lynette here today. Lynette, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited about being on this panel and being able to contribute something that will help our people be able to understand that it's okay to talk about mental illness and
right.
that we can heal.
Absolutely.
Absolutely can heal.
Yeah, and it's all about healing and hope. And, you know, I have to also just say rest in peace to two of our civil rights icons that passed on yesterday, Reverend C.T. Vivian and Congressman John Lewis, who is
That's
the
right.
congressman from my great state of Georgia. And so we talk about healing and hope, and they instill so much of that in us. And so we keep the fight going, right, in their
That's
honor.
right.
And so, Lynette, could you just share with everyone a little bit about your background? I know you have a wealth of experience in the New York City area, but give us an idea of what you do on a regular basis.
Okay, well, I've been in law enforcement for probably about 37 years. And early on the front page of the newspapers, America's Top Bounty Hunter is a girl, and did several TV shows on that. And I was experiencing a mental health issue because I had a major trauma at the age of 7, left for dead, and came out of that. And I continued to go to school in a school system in northern New Jersey where they looked at my behavior and not me.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So, which led to me going on into police work. And I look at police work a little bit differently than most do. I look at it as a service, a total service to people, and being able to look at them as human, right? Look at people as human and underlying issues, why crime or why the behaviors. And that has really helped me in my law enforcement career. And then I got into the crisis intervention portion of it, where I teach police officers about mental health and how to de-escalate situations and handle people with mental health. Subsequently, I started my own business, the Lynette Shaw Group, where I have gone into school systems and to educate those who are responsible for our young people, so they understand that it's not that they can't learn, but it could be that they've had trauma or something there that's preventing that learning, and helping them to recognize signs and symptoms of mental illness in our young people so that they can teach them effectively and not put them in a box and write them off as lost causes because of behavior. So I have been doing that as well.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, I think your work is critical right now. To have someone like yourself inside of law enforcement and advocating for the rights of people within our communities, because as you mentioned, oftentimes our young Black girls and boys, when they act out, not to condone what they're doing, but let's really, get to the root of what's going on. And oftentimes there are underlying mental health challenges, right, that manifest themselves in ways that lead to sometimes the criminal behavior. But if we can get to the real root of the problem and teach the teachers better, as well as our parents and our community, and really normalize this conversation around mental health, I think we would see a lot of hope and healing, right, within the community.
And an opportunity for young people to be who they really are meant to be, instead of relying on what people look at them as, or names that people call them because of some of the behaviors that they do. I see so much more in our young people than that. You remove that trauma and have them to navigate that process, and they can be themselves, and it's inspiring to see that.
Yeah, I want to say it kind of moves us, Shanti, from surviving to thriving, right? When we talk about healing, so many of our young people are so always in that survival mode because of that trauma Lynette's talking about. So if we could really address the issues and get to the root, then we can see our young people prosper and really grow and sort of make that transition from survival mode to understanding their greatness that's inside of them.
No doubt, Dr. Randy. And we talk about being in survival mode, and and really teaching the young people. I think we could also do a better job as a community of teaching the adults.
That's right.
Right? When you talk about trauma and things you've experienced within the family, you know, of course, growing up in African-American culture, it's something we didn't really talk about in terms of mental health and our problems. And I'll just share quickly a little bit of my journey. I grew up in the South in Atlanta. My dad was of Indian descent. My mother's Black. My father took his own life when I was 7 months old. And that was, of course, traumatic for our family. We did not go to counseling. We did not share much about it. And we really hid our feelings and buried them. And it's unfortunate that even as that nuclear unit and family, we never discussed it. And I would see my mother crying, and I knew she was experiencing probably some level of, you know, extreme sadness or, you know, depression. Back then, I really didn't know what those terms meant, but
Sure.
I knew my mom was sad, and I knew her feelings were down all the time. And so fast forward, I really just, you know, buried my feelings, and I became a pretty good student and went on to work and have a wonderful career in the entertainment industry. But I started, you know, experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety working in a high profile, high paced industry in the early 2000s. And I think that was when I had a really difficult situation at work, and it really started snowballing and taking a turn for the worse. It was right around probably 2001. And I remember uttering the words, maybe I should just kill myself. I didn't act on that, but that really scared me, Lynette and Dr. Randy, because it was the first time that I had ever uttered those words. And I thought, you know, just subconsciously, that because my dad had taken his own life, that maybe down the line when things got tough for me, that would be something that I would consider. And so it's my sister who convinced me. She's she passed away last year, but she was 8.5 years my senior. And so she encouraged me to go to counseling because she went when she was in college. And so fast forward, I went to counseling and therapy for a couple of months. I really should have, you know, stayed with it, but I did not. You know how we are sometimes, our egos get in the way and we think we're okay and we don't need any more help.
That's
and
right.
So fast forward, I ended up, you know, having a storied career in music, becoming executive vice president. In 2009, I was working at Universal Motown, and it was the worst year of my life up until that point. My mother developed Alzheimer's. I had some family that were experiencing some mental wellness challenges. My uncle died, who was like a father to me. And I remember my entire right side, you know, this is the Black Health Summit. I'm riding uptown in a taxi in New York City. My entire right side went numb. Scared me to death. Ended up having all these tests, and the doctors told me that it was a result of stress. So I ended up making the difficult decision. I quit and walked away and came back home. And over probably the last 10 years, I started doing a lot of community work, but then my best friend took her own life in 2014. And then in 2015, I came close to taking my own life. It's a lot of layers that I skipped over, but you get the gist of the story. And that is why when I knew that I got the help that I needed, it was my duty and my ministry to be able to help other people and start Silence to Shame. So here we are today, Silence to Shame, partnering with Black Health Matters on this important conversation. So we're going to jump right into it. I'd love to start again with you, Dr. Randy. Can you talk about how this pandemic has been a strain mentally on so many of us in the Black community?
Definitely, Shanti. I can speak on that. I mean, think about prior to the pandemic even occurring, Black people were already facing so many challenges. When you look at some of the disparities going on in our communities, some of the issues that we had to face prior to the pandemic, when you talk about racism, when you talk about access to health, health support, when you talk about resources for our community, poverty, the high stress and burnout, some of those issues were already at play. So when COVID hit, it really just pulled the curtains back. It really just opened up the curtains, and more people were just realizing what was going on with our communities and what we were dealing with. So when you add in COVID, you're talking about the inability to access services, the health concerns, the loss, the trauma, the triggering, because things that we had been through prior to the pandemic, we were triggered by this pandemic. So a lot of stuff that people went through and thought they overcame and thought they sort of worked through from the past resurfaced as well. And couple that with the anxiety and depression, with not being able to be there with your loved ones while they passed away, isolating because we couldn't see each other. All those things impacted our mental health and our wellness. And lastly, Shanti, let me just say this. Then we were faced with these, the social injustices. And one of the stats I wanted to tell you about was right after they made public the George Floyd video, we're talking about anxiety and depression went from 20-30% up to 40-45% for Black people because of the trauma. So think of that coupled with COVID. It has just been one of those, years and seasons that it's been extremely tough for us. And lastly, the biggest thing is just being able to access quality mental health and wellness services. That's been one of the most difficult things because amongst our people, it seems like we're not offered the same quality, or because of issues in terms of us, not talking about our feelings or feeling comfortable about it, we end up suppressing a lot of that stuff and holding it in. So that has made for this like perfect storm of sort of like mental health, wellness, issues that have been taking place during COVID.
That's right, 100%. And with COVID, you think about it, African Americans, right, are still dying, right,
Sure.
in proportionate rates, and it is just a lot right now. I think every single day that we wake up, we have to be grateful that we're alive.
That's
but
right.
At the same time, as Black people in this country, it's a lot on all of us. I don't care if you're a CEO, if you're an administrative assistant, if you're in law enforcement, if you work in mental health, if you're a doctor, medical doctor, whatever, a school teacher, we all, I think, are experiencing some sort of anxiety, even if we've never felt these feelings before. Right. We're kind of looking at our bodies and going, well, hey, I don't recognize that. What is that? What are these feelings? That's right. And Lynette, I want to kind of pose that same question to you, particularly about the pandemic within a pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. And racial injustice, and you working in law enforcement and being a Black woman at that, I cannot imagine, right? And we're going to get to the second part of your question in a second regarding COVID, but I want to start with the racial injustice part and just talk about how that has been a complete strain on our mental health.
That has been so difficult. It's been difficult for us as Black folks, period, because it raised something in us. And I can say personally, it raised generations of things that I've been told throughout my family, and traumas that have happened throughout, things that happened with my family down south and why we had to come here. And it just really, it hit something in me. And as a police officer, it had a funny effect within police departments, right? And so Black police officers and myself, I can say, we felt too Black to be blue and too blue to be Black, because there was, we're like in the middle. Now, while it very, very, very difficult, a lot of anxiety and afraid, and I've always been afraid that, I've given so much to my community and people that I have mentored, within my, the police job, being able to connect with community. I run a community policing unit. I am that bridge between police and our community. And, I make sure that they come together and that we're good. And it's a very difficult situation when within police departments, now you have non-Black folk in police departments that are angry and they don't understand our plight, that there has been, we've all been lied to. We learned about police work and we said police work began with Peel, and it's a model from the UK, and it's not true. Police work started and police started back when they were deputized to capture runaway slaves.
That's right.
And so we don't know that within police departments. That's not what they are taught. So they don't understand our generational pain.
That's right.
And it's been so difficult to try to explain people are not talking to me. They, you know, they don't want to talk about it. They just want to be angry. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be some real teaching. I do teach within police academies, and I plan to do a curriculum surrounding the real truth about policing and why there has to be an understanding about the Black community and why we are in so much pain, and how we can come together and change the narrative about this racism and the systemic issue that is within police departments. It is no secret. Some don't believe it, but it is there. And, you know, all of those that are on the inside, we know that. It's been very difficult, a lot of anxiety.
Thank you. Dr. Randy, you want to speak a little bit to just generational trauma? I'm glad you raised the issue of how policing really started. And then you think about, you know, the way we experience so much trauma, whether it was 400 years ago or even, you know, fast forward through the Jim Crow days, and now, you know, we're children of the civil rights movement, but it's still so much that has never really properly been addressed around generational trauma. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dr. Randy?
Definitely, and you brought up an excellent point. I mean, you went all the way back when you're talking about 400 years ago, still dealing with some of the same issues that that reoccurred at that time. So those issues, we never really resolved and fully healed from that. So I think a lot of times with trauma, we don't always realize that if something is very traumatic and we don't resolve it or we don't address it, a lot of times we pass that on. So whether that is family members, intergenerational trauma, through our behaviors, through the way we socialize, the way we interact, our emotional health, or also the fact that we may not even seek help at all because we were sort of conditioned and taught not to talk about our feelings. So what happens is the next generation sort of takes on that same sort of energy, that same sort of plight and those behaviors, and it just continues and continues and continues until we have that break the cycle, break the stigma, change the narrative approach, where in that generation or that individual has so much power. You're talking about the ability to literally break cycles that have been tormenting and tearing apart families and tearing apart generations. So this conversation in itself is literally breaking the cycle, because we're on this big, powerful event talking about mental health and wellness. So literally right now, somebody's listening and is going to take this information, decide this is it. No generation after me will go through the same things again. So it's empowering, and it's such a great work that we're doing right now. And I'm excited about it.
You can be that change in your family. And that was my sister and her legacy, you know, certainly amongst other things in our family, but breaking that cycle of not seeking treatment, right? Not going to therapy, and her starting that, you know, allowed me to follow suit. So very, very grateful for that. And then in terms of the generational trauma, there's a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome that I recommend for you guys to check out. I just ordered it myself. I read a lot about it, but I hadn't read it yet. But just obviously with everything that's going on and our heightened sense of awareness in our community, I think now is the time for us to educate ourselves and learn as much as we can around trauma and mental wellness. So you guys definitely check that book out. Lynette, I want to go back to you really quickly. Now, I know that you were infected, you were tested positive rather with COVID-19, as well as your family members. And I'm glad that you're doing okay. I'm glad you're able to be on this webinar today with us. Can you talk about how that affected your family as well as your mental health, and how did you cope?
Well, so my mom was sick first. My mom got sick, and in March, I started feeling really fatigued. And so I went to get tested, and it was positive. I wasn't really feeling too sick, just fatigued. And at that time, my children, I have 3 young people in the house. And as soon as mine came back positive, I was like, you are going to get tested. And every one of them went to get tested. And two of them came back positive. My youngest daughter did not come back positive, but I'm sure she also had it because she was eating after me and all that. And she just probably went at a time that it didn't, you know, come up. But I got really, really sick. Had fever, chills, body aches, couldn't breathe. And then one of my daughters got pretty sick, and she had the, fevers and whatnot. So it was really, I had a lot of anxiety. It was difficult in that I was trying to hide my symptoms so that I could take care of her. My son was asymptomatic the whole time. And he was fine. My other daughter got sick for a little bit, and it was just a little fever. But my one daughter, my 20-year-old, she got pretty sick, and I was taking care of her while I was trying to manage my own illness. And
how did you cope mentally? How did you cope with all that?
There was a lot of anxiety, but what I would do is when I got sick, I jumped in the shower. I breathed in a whole lot of, trying to I did not want to go to the hospital and leave my family here. So what I did is I would turn on YouTube and I would get word. It'd be TD Jakes, it'd be any word, affirmations, meditation, anything that I could grab onto to just say, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. And I have to keep going. And one thing as Black women that we think that we have an S on our chest about everything. And I tried to suppress anything that I was thinking that, negative, and I would just listen to positive affirmations and I would do what I had to do because my children were here and I couldn't let them see me, so down that they would be worried. And that is the way a lot of Black women are taught. We have to find a way. We can't, and afterwards, and my mom was at her own home sick at 81 years old, and my brother went to take care of her. And I was also worried about her because I've always taken care of my mom, and I was not able to do that. So I had a lot of anxiety, which again, I use those tools that I know calm me, gospel music, just uplifting things. And then I was doing a lot of my grandmother's natural remedies to help myself with ginger and garlic and honey and all that stuff. And I thank God that all of us, got through that. Now, afterwards, after everything came down and I had some other issues, I had lung damage, my liver enlarged and all of that kind of stuff after I went to get checked. And I started to get a little bit depressed. And I would stay in my room. And what I did was something I knew I should not have done. And I was Netflixing everything. I would try to watch Netflix and then switch on the news, which was talking about all these deaths and COVID and all that kind of stuff. I had to pull myself up out of that by limiting my consumption of television altogether. I could not watch the news. I tried to stay, limit that social media piece because it was all negativity. It was everything doom and gloom. And in the midst of that, a very good friend of mine who works very closely with me, a dispatcher, passed away. And I had talked to him the day before because I had it and he was feeling really sick. And I told him to go to the hospital. He went to the hospital one day late and did not make it. And so that was very devastating for me. And I would be in my room crying, didn't want the kids to, again, see it. And that really devastated me. So
well, I just want to say we're also glad that you're okay. And I'm very sorry about your friend. And that's going to take me to our next question. So many people have been experiencing grief and loss, Dr. Randy. I lost a cousin and ended up having to watch her funeral virtually. And we know in African American culture that the funeral, the homegoing service, the celebration, the repast, that's a way for us to heal. right? And it also plays a big part of our mental wellness in terms of healing from the loss of a loved one. And so that's been really difficult. So, you know, families couldn't attend the funerals, like I said, or they had to watch it online. And in some instances, you know, couldn't even see the bodies of their loved ones, right, before they were cremated. Can you just talk about the grief process through what we've been experiencing in our community, and any good tips or activities that we can do to manage the grief process?
Yeah, I think, Shanti, this is an excellent question because, again, even prior to COVID, we know just in general how difficult grief and loss is. And when you talk about in our communities, in the Black communities, it's like a celebration of life. Like it's an opportunity to have, as we talked before, about healing and closure. Now with COVID and this COVID era that we're in now, and this season that we're in now, a lot of us didn't even have the opportunity to even see our loved ones. We couldn't even say our last goodbyes. We couldn't even visit them. I mean, when Lynette talked about somebody going into the hospital and then the next day or the next same day, they don't return. I mean, think about how traumatic that is, talking about the connection between grief, loss, and then trauma. So it's been extremely challenging because how do we heal? The wound sort of going through the process of grieving is different for everyone. But in this COVID times, it's even more so difficult because we just don't have the opportunity to say goodbye like we normally would. And in our community, like we said, it's sort of like the gathering, the solidarity of coming together. So I think one of the things I recommend is that nothing's off the table in terms of how we heal. So in this sense, we have to be creative and we have to literally reach out to our loved ones using this technology. We have to be able to call that person on the phone or call our family members on the phone, get on a Zoom meeting, get on a text chat, and be able to reach out to them and create the solidarity that we would have if we were in, you know, our church or our religious places and coming together just like that. And also just allow yourself to feel. Don't be hard on yourself during this time. I think it's one of those just seasons where I think that if we allow it to, we're going to beat ourselves up even more because we're going to feel guilt that we weren't able to be there for our loved ones that passed. So I think more than ever, it's okay. Be kind to yourself, be compassionate to yourself, and just, you know what, create the memories, right? You can do writing, journals, talk about the memories you had with that loved one. Just create some symbolic memories and opportunities to celebrate that person in a different way. Because at the end of the day, it's all about being able to feel, heal, and grow through it and go through it. And I think your loved one would appreciate anything that we could do to show our love and compassion for them and you know, our well wishes for them during this time.
Absolutely. And, you know, I mentioned that I lost my sister last year, and, you know, her 1 year anniversary was in April. And of course it was while the pandemic is going on. And I'll be honest, I've had some really, really tough days, and I've come so far with doing this work, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Mental health, but I would be lying if I said that I still have really tough days, some really dark days. My sister was actually, she had just gotten her master's in counseling and was about to become a clinician. And she was specializing in grief as well as addiction. And she told me, we had a conversation on our Silence and Shame podcast a couple months before she passed. And she talked about once you can get past that debilitating part of the grief process, then you can really start healing. And so for me, I really needed a support group. So I found a support group. There's a great organization called griefshare.org. And so I did that. And then being able to even find a therapist. I noticed in Q&A, a lot of people are saying that they've had difficulties finding Black therapists. I know we're going to give some resources towards the end of the panel discussion, but, you know, therapyforblackgirls.com is incredible. Therapyforblackmen.org is great. Silence and Shame, we work with a lot of African-American clinicians, so we're happy to help anybody that's on this, you know, and we'll give you our email address before we end. But there are, I would say this statistically, I know, Dr. Randy, is about 4% of all psychiatrists, and I don't know if that's the same for psychologists and social workers, are people of color. And I'm assuming that Black people are wrapped up in that people of color statistic. And oftentimes some of the better ones that people refer are always busy and overworked. And right now, I think now that we are talking about mental health more and more, we're going to have to see a need for
right.
more African-American clinicians. And that's not to say you can't see a therapist that doesn't look like you.
Nope.
But oftentimes I think it's important to add that in our communities, you know, just from a cultural competency perspective, you want to have someone that understands your community and understands,
right.
excuse me, what you're going through. And as these clinicians are getting trained, they do go through the cultural competency training, but it's not always, you know, the best case scenario. So do you have any advice on people finding a therapist that looks like them in the Black community?
Yeah, I think some of those organizations you mentioned, I'm also going to mention Black Men Heal as well, because they do a lot of great stuff specifically for Black men in regards to free mental health services. Taraji P. Henson has a great organization where she's actually connecting and partnering with Black clinicians in the field and allowing, once again, people to access those services for free. So one of the things I recommend is that you utilize if you have insurance, utilize your insurance, and you can actually request and look for specifically clinicians and counselors who are African American, who look like you. And I think sometimes we overlook that. We are out there. And Shanti, while you were speaking, I wanted to say this for any clinician, Black clinician, social worker, therapist, counselor that's viewing right now. More than ever before, we have to be on our game. And I'm saying we, because I'm in that circle. That means we have to make sure that if somebody's calling, we're reaching back, we're returning those phone calls right away. If we are booked, we have to make sure these individuals can access other services, that we don't keep people hanging on and not calling them back, because more than ever before, they need our support. So I'm just making sure that, guys, if you, or girl or women that's on the call, please don't stop. You deserve to heal. So if you don't get somebody on that first call, keep going, look for the next person. Healing is yours. And there's people out there like myself and other clinicians and these organizations like Shanti, Silence to Shame, that we will be willing to help you. And if we can't, we can connect you. Because that's part of the work that we do as social workers and change agents as well, is brokering those relationships to making sure people get the help that they need.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Randy. And we're going to try to limit our answers right now to 2 minutes, just in the interest of time, so we can get to some more of this Q&A. I want to go back to you, Lynette. Can you talk about the work that you do with CIT training and the importance of it with the police and what we're dealing with within our community around mental illness?
Yeah, absolutely. So crisis intervention, it's been around since 88, but it didn't come out really until 2007. The crisis intervention team is basically a partnership between community advocates, mental health advocates, and community stakeholders like faith-based organizations. So it is a training, a 5-day training, and it's in depth about mental health and how police are to handle it. And it's geared to help people that have a mental illness or addiction. And what we do is it's in depth about how does mental illness look out there on the street? What does it look like, right? And is some of the behaviors that you see, is that a crime or is it a behavior associated with an illness? And so the crisis intervention team is put together so that we can train as many police officers, community members, faith-based organizations, to be able to come together and understand each other, and for police officers to understand what mental health looks like, what schizophrenia looks like, what bipolar disorder looks like, so that they can be able to de-escalate situations, not go straight to their gun because it appears that somebody is dangerous. Mm-hmm. The real fact is that people think that people with mental illness are dangerous, okay? And the real truth of it is they're more likely to be victimized than to victimize someone else.
That's right.
And most people don't know that. And they need our help. the CIT program is geared to be able to keep people out of the criminal justice system, a jail diversion program of sorts, to keep our people up out of jail, because they don't belong in jail. They need mental health services. This class, the particular class that we have, we teach police officers how to learn about resources in the community so that they can refer people and go a little bit further on in their job to be able to help people that are experiencing mental health issue or people that are in crisis.
Thank you so much. And I actually have a family member that we ended up having to call 911 on, and we definitely told them that we needed, you know, a CIT trained officer. And I gotta say that it helped, you know, de-escalate the situation. And they ended up taking him to the hospital instead of taking him to jail. So thank you again for the work that you do. Dr. Randy, I want to go back to you. You know, a lot of people through COVID and the pandemic, within the pandemic, if you will, have been reaching out, trying to find therapists, and we're seeing telehealth really explode. And so many therapists are doing work virtually right now. What do you think of telehealth, and do you think it can be made more culturally responsive?
I think telehealth is actually great because what happens is it allows people to access services that maybe in the past wouldn't have gone to an office, where they feel more comfortable maybe doing it from the comforts of their own home. So in that way, in that respect, telehealth services have been great. Now, one of the issues goes back to what we talked about earlier, some of the disparities in terms of being able to have internet access and having the capabilities to actually reach out to those therapists. But in terms of it making it culturally competent and actually making it effective, it's on the clinician to make sure that they understand the platform, making sure that the client feels comfortable when they reach out, and also make it engaging. I think one of the things that we can understand is that therapy doesn't look the same for everybody. And we could certainly make it exciting and make it great to sort of be in this space to be able to heal. And I think that's a responsibility that we have as clinicians, to make sure that people feel comfortable, that this is an emotionally safe space to be able to talk about anything they're going through. And even if it's just, you know, a 45-minute session, it could be so powerful in itself.
And, you know, I think it's important too that we stick with it. Oftentimes, if we try therapy and we don't think it's the right thing, you know, we'll let it go so quickly.
That's right.
And that is something that we as African Americans, we have to try to stick with it. And I tell people, you know, it's like finding any other doctor. You may go and, you know, find a therapist virtually and it doesn't really feel like the right fit for you, right? Or you may not feel comfortable opening up and sharing once, you know, you go through your first session. But it's okay. You don't have to, you know, there's no obligation, right? There's no contract that you have to sign.
No.
You can continue finding the right person. There's so many great organizations, and I'm looking in the Q&A room, like, you know, check out BEAM. It's an acronym, but if you just Google BEAM, it's the Black, I need to Google it myself and tell you guys, but I'll pull that up while we're answering some more questions. But I just feel like we can't give up on it. And it's just so many resources out there, and we have to give therapy a chance. No longer can we just say therapy's for white people. That is a misconception. It is not true. We're going to end that right here, right now.
That's right.
Ever thought that therapy actually is okay.
And Shanti, can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah,
so one of the reasons why we may sort of pull out of that therapy is, like you said, because it can be uncomfortable. Think about it. If it's not something that we're used to doing or something that we've never done before, it's going to be uncomfortable. But as we know, it's in that uncomfortability that our growth and healing takes place. So like Shanti said, if we can endure, and we are very resilient people, so if we can endure a little bit longer, so maybe one session, it feels a little shaky, uncomfortable, give it that second session, and you'll start to see after a while that healing's taking place and you'll start to feel better again. But it takes time.
Absolutely. And so the organization I was speaking of is BEAM. It's the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective. And if you go to silencetheshame.com, our website, and I'll type that out for you guys, you can click under resources, under how to help, what we do rather. And it'll take you to all the links that we're talking about, so you guys can, you know, not be ashamed to get the help that you need. You know, the other thing I just want to touch on too is like isolation and how that can really be detrimental. So many of us either live alone or aren't able to maybe, you know, visit family as much, and we're isolated through COVID-19. And the loneliness can certainly lead to depression. You know, you got to be aware if you see any significant changes within your family members' personality, if you're calling them and they're not responding and not reaching back out to you. Can you give us a little bit more information in terms of how to cope with the isolation? And Lynette, if you have anything that you want to add to that. I know you live with a family, but I'm sure that you have experienced either coworkers or family members that are isolated. Because for one, for me, you know, when I'm feeling that anxiety coming on, there's a really great breathing technique. It's called the 4-4-8 technique. You literally just stop, right? And you sit up straight and you breathe in for 4 seconds. You hold it for 4, and then you do a long exhale for 8 seconds. And when I find myself getting anxious and I do about 5 to 10 reps of that, it automatically recenters me and I feel a lot better. Also, I go outside and I take walks. It's important to get that vitamin D. Sometimes when I'm feeling sad or depressed, I don't even want to open the blinds and I don't even want to go outside, but it's so important that you get outside and you either exercise or walk and get those endorphins going, because it's been proven scientifically that you feel better. But do you want to share anything else, Dr. Randy, around isolation?
I think you said it right. There's a reason why the Home Depots and the Lowe's have been packed during this time, because people are trying to find ways to stay busy and stay active and getting outside, working on their garden, getting that vitamin D, as you talked about. But there's nothing wrong with journaling as well. Get a chance to just write, have moments of gratitude when you wake up in the morning, even though you might be dealing with isolation and stuff like that. Give me 3 things that you're grateful for every single morning, and you can write those things down. Those are grounding techniques. They're resetting techniques. They sort of make you feel good, because in the event I can't visit family members, but I'm alive, I'm breathing, I have food in my refrigerator. So all the things that sometimes we may have taken for granted, it gives us an opportunity to sort of be grateful for that. And also reach out to somebody maybe you haven't spoken to in a while. So again, this is an opportunity for us to say, wait a minute, let me check in with my friend so-and-so. Let me reach out to them, see how they're doing. Because we know when we bring off that compassion, that same energy comes back to us. That empathy is so powerful too. So that's just a couple of things that people can do during this time.
Lynette, you want to add?
Well, as you may or may not know, I am diagnosed with PTSD.
I didn't know that.
I'm diagnosed with PTSD from several traumas that I've, experienced. So,
and if I could just jump in, someone actually asked a question about how to find a good therapist that specializes in PTSD or women that have been abused. So just want to put that there.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with ACEs, the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Well, there's 10 of them, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I have all 10 from my childhood. So there's been quite a bit of trauma in my lifetime. So therapy has saved my entire life. I have to say it has saved me. And since I started going to therapy over 20 some years ago, I do not miss a week. If there's nothing wrong, if I'm not triggered, if I don't miss a week. And so I don't suffer so much with regard to isolation because of the pandemic or because of what's going on, because I utilize FaceTime, I call people, I have a prayer group of 4 women that every morning at 7:30 we touch base and we're able to, see how each other's doing. And if one of us aren't doing well, we're praying for each other. We are really engaging and we check in with each other. It's really important to check in. But again, therapy has saved my entire life. I have been blessed to have several, 3 or 4 therapists throughout that period of time that I loved every single one of them. And one of them was a man of color, and I loved him, but the others had not been. And while they don't, know my culture, they know my trauma. And they have been able to help me through that. Very difficult. There is a shortage of Black therapists. There's a shortage, and there are so many, just so the audience knows, there's so many scholarships and grants out there to put people who want to go through to be a psychologist or a clinician or whatever. There's a lot of money out there for people of color that want to go into those professions, because there's a shortage. There's definitely a shortage.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Randy, let's talk about the cost of therapy, right? I think that, a lot of African Americans feel like they can't find a good therapist, so they can't afford them, or, and choose providers that aren't in their network. Because I certainly have to make referrals all the time, but it gets really costly for some folks when they're not in their network. And sometimes, effective white therapists just can't grasp the trauma, right? Whether it's from the experience of a Black male perspective or a Black female perspective. What are your thoughts around the cost of therapy?
I think we are at a place right now where we need to really look at how we can provide cost-effective therapy, but we don't want the therapy to suffer in terms of its impact and in terms of its success and how well it can be provided. So I always tell people right away, you want to look for these organizations that some of them offer free or low cost services. And then there's a lot of therapists out there that certainly utilize a sliding scale. Like myself, a sliding scale basically means they go based on your income, and they have a certain amount of slots in their practice where they could provide for people. But one of the costs, and some people actually do a lot of pro bono stuff too, where they can take on a couple of clients too. So it's one of those things where we have to sort of be conscious and conscientious in looking for the services, but also see the investment in it as well. Because I think a lot of times we don't always understand the value of it, because again, going back to that history, it's just one of those things that have been so foreign to us. So I think one of our jobs as clinicians is sort of demystify therapy and what happens behind those closed doors, so people understand the true value of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're right at the 10-minute mark, and we can go ahead and put the slide up if you want to, Randy, that shows the resources, but we're going to continue answering questions from our Q&A. Maria Davis, hi Maria. If this is the same Maria Davis I'm thinking of in New York City, a dear friend. She says, in New York, there is so much help for Black women, but hard to find help for Black men. Lynette, do you have any resources you can share around help for Black men in New York City?
I have, I do not at this time. I will share it if there's a way to do that. I know that there are a couple of places in New York City that just started when COVID came up, and it's just for Black men. I have a friend that was looking for those kinds of services, and he got bounced around and eventually said, you know what, I don't think I can find anybody. And that is a real crying shame, because when our men are reaching out, they are hurting.
Yeah.
And so I know that I don't know it offhand, what the name of it is, but if there's a way that we can get information, I will send it to whoever I can. It's in Brooklyn, I do know that.
Okay, great. And so we'll talk to Rosalind and Deidre and see how we can make sure we can get this information back to the viewers. One of the things you guys will notice, okay, so our contact information is up here, but also if you look at the bottom, we did put some resources up, NAMI.org. NAMI is a National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's probably one of the largest advocacy organizations in the country. So if you go on NAMI.org, you can type in your zip code and you can find therapists in your area. Okay. I will say that I'm glad NAMI does have a really good representation of African Americans that either volunteer for the organization, but they all have chapters, right, throughout major cities. In Atlanta, various counties in Atlanta have their own chapters. So definitely check out NAMI.org. Again, therapyforblackgirls.com is on there, therapyforblackmen.org. The griefshare.org, which is, you can find a support group or possibly even a therapist around grief support. And then there's also another organization that's important to mention called the Crisis Text Line Organization. It's a national organization as well. But if you're in crisis and you can't afford to see a therapist right at the moment, but you feel like you may either harm yourself or someone in your family has to talk to someone, and it may be like 2 or 3 in the morning, you can text the word silence to 741-741 and immediately be connected with a counselor. Now, this is not in lieu of therapy, but the counselors are trained to de-escalate someone if they're in crisis before you may call 911 if they're threatening to harm themselves. I think that is extremely important to mention. Also, Silence to Shame, we have over 30 podcast episodes available on Google Play, iTunes, or SoundCloud. Another gentleman asked a question about just finding help for Black men. I mean, we have an episode up called Brothers Get Your Mind Right. And so we interview African-American clinicians. We've interviewed people in the faith community. That's probably another panel for another day, but I think it's extremely important that as African-Americans, we understand the dynamic between faith and behavioral health, because it is so important that we do pray, right? And that we are spiritual and that we understand that. But I also want y'all to know that God gave our, folks who want to become doctors and clinicians the wherewithal to help people. So we got to allow God to work through these people that can help us. And that's another way that we can help to really, erase stigma in our communities. And one of the things that we did with Silence to Shame is we went around to various faith communities talking about behavioral health and starting these conversations. So it's extremely important. And now a lot of churches, are more open to it. They may have some in-house clinicians, or they can refer you out. So that's extremely important as well. I do know Camille asked, will we be able to access this presentation after today? Yes, you will. It is being recorded. Dr. Randy, how can you select a therapist for teenagers?
Wow, that's a great question. I think me specifically, because I work with teens and I get this question a lot, I think if you're reaching out to a clinician, you want to make sure and ask them, do they specialize? Because there's a lot of people that specialize in working with young people. So when you make that call, you make that inquiry to that clinician, ask them specifically, do they have any training? Do they specialize? Is that their niche sort of demographic? Because do they work in schools? Do they consult with schools? These are the clinicians that do a lot of great work, but we have certain qualifications, certain studies that we have done that sort of specialize us to work with that teen and young people population. So I think it's all about asking, and you can ask for those credentials as well.
Absolutely. Lynette, do you have any more information you want to share around mental health first aid? I know, I just want to let everyone know that Silence to Shame started yesterday, offering free suicide prevention training. We used a facilitator out of Charlotte, North Carolina, who's been doing this work for quite some time. We were able to train 16 people. And we had a youth class set up, but we didn't have enough people registered. So if you have a team that's interested, it's a 1 hour and 30-minute class around suicide prevention. We're going to be offering them. So you can reach out to us, send us an email at info@silencetheshame.com, or you can follow us on Instagram, that's on the screen, at Silence to Shame, and send us a direct message. But we're going to start offering QPR training, which is suicide prevention training, as well as mental health first aid training. Lynette, do you want to say anything around mental health first aid training?
Yeah, the mental health first aid training, we're going to begin offering it virtually as well, trying to just make sure that we keep getting this information
and tell them what that is.
Mental health first aid, it is it's a national research-driven curriculum that is geared to help people, help other people that are help themselves, or help those who are in, that could be in crisis, or to recognize signs and symptoms of mental illness, so that you can help somebody. And oftentimes we don't know what to say to people who are, they might say that they are suicidal, and we think that we got to keep that a secret and all that. There's all kinds of tips in there to make sure that you recognize some signs and symptoms, so that you can be able to talk to somebody that may be in crisis and help them through that, and then refer to the appropriate help that they need. I just taught one of those classes right before COVID, 30 at-risk young people took the class and was able to get through it. But we now have to do it virtually because they don't want to do in-person classes, and we will resume that after. But we're going to be offering them virtually as well.
And Shanti, if people could reach out to me.
We have about 1
too.
minute left, guys.
Okay, go ahead, because we mental hop too, and I could give them resources for reaching out.
Go
for
ahead.
information with teens. We've been holding virtual symposiums for young people as well over at Mental Hop, all virtual. So we're talking about, we just finished out with a group of young men talking about healing, talking about trauma. So if anybody's listening, please reach out to me too, because I'll be doing another one next month in August for our young men and our young ladies as well. So please, and I can give you some resources for young people as well.
And it's extremely important that you guys check out our website, silencetheshame.com. We have probably done 6 or 7 community conversations. We've done some around postpartum depression through a pandemic, relationships in a pandemic. And a lot of these are on our website or either on our YouTube page at Silence the Shame TV. And we have a really important webinar coming up on Monday because July is BIPOC month, which is formerly named Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, but now it's called BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. But we're doing the state of our emotional health, taking a look at Black women and debunking the superwoman notion. So thank you guys so much. I wish we had 2 more hours.
I know, it's been great.
Special shout out to Black Health Matters, Rosalind Daniels, Deidre Tate for putting this together. Thank you, Lynette. Thank you, Dr. Randy. Everyone, please reach out to us. We have to keep this conversation going. We have to continue to normalize the conversation and know that it's okay to not be okay, but what's not okay is to not get help. So let's make sure that we take time, save a life, and silence the shame. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.